There's been a Batman take or opinion going around for quite a while now that basically, to TLDR, it says, why doesn't Batman just hang up his cape and cowl and devote all of his time and money to philanthropy? If he really wants to help Gotham, why doesn't he just give his, all of his wealth away, basically, the amount that is renewable, so that he's able to make back money and continually give away? Why doesn't he just do that and stop beating up those poor mentally ill people that are very obviously all in need of severe help, right? It's a very, I don't know, the term hippie is not nice now, but it is a very peace and love type idea of take, where it believes that all of Gotham's problems can be solved through philanthropy alone. I think the problem is with this take, one, I wanted to show a compilation of people saying this, but I realized that they would either get dogpiled or it would be giving them free attention, so you can very easily find this yourself on any social media or just Google. And two, I think that the problem with this take, though, really is just that it assumes that all problems can be solved through philanthropy, and it assumes that Batman isn't already doing this, right? It assumes that he is putting the majority of his wealth towards his war on crime in most versions of the character, since that's kind of how we're broadly speaking about it. Today I wanted to go through and look at some examples of how Batman already actually does this in almost every continuity that I can think of, whether it be live action or the comics themselves, cartoons, etc., and kind of, run through some examples of this. I do also want to put credit where credit is due. I did find a lot of these examples myself through research, but also there is a Twitter account that did a really good job compiling a list of examples of Bruce Wayne using his charity and philanthropy and his money to actually help the world. So that is Ashley the Bat Family. I will include her link in the description down below if you want to follow her on Twitter or check her out. I will also include the link to this specific thread where she did a lot of examples, because I took a couple of them to use here. So thanks to Ashley, who does not even know we exist, I'm sure. But it's going to be an interesting talk today. So I wanted to start out with the comics. In the comics themselves, so this is the mainline continuity, it's worth mentioning that Bruce Wayne's charity examples go back all the way to, we're talking late Golden Age Batman, where he was giving away money to help victims out who had been robbed and all kinds of other stuff. But if we get into more specific and modern examples of the character, because yes, I know, the continuity has changed. Well, even in an event like after No Man's Land, Bruce Wayne essentially personally rebuilt Gotham City. He used all of his wealth to actually fund the recreation of Gotham City, because No Man's Land saw Gotham City get pretty much completely destroyed. I mean, it was in a massive state of disrepair, and Bruce Wayne, one man, came in and actually fixed it. It's also worth noting that as far back as 1976 in Detective Comics 457, there has been a recurring character in the Batman mythos named Leslie Tompkins. Those of you who are fans of the DCAU, especially Batman the Animated Series, might remember this character. She actually runs the Thomas Wayne Memorial Clinic in Park Row. Now, that might sound like, oh, well, she just runs a clinic. She was probably friends with the Waynes because Thomas Wayne was a big-time doctor, right? That's true, but here's the thing. The Thomas Wayne Memorial Clinic is funded entirely by Bruce Wayne, and it is at a complete loss. This is a free clinic. It offers services to the poor, to the disenfranchised, to those who can't get services elsewhere in Park Row, which is a pretty bad area of Gotham City. It's just to be a good guy and actually help out people who can't help themselves. Now, this clinic exists in a lot of different continuities. Like I said, it's in the mainline comics continuity, but it is also in the DCAU, and it was founded under the same set of principles, funded by Bruce at a loss, merely to help those who can't afford medical care and can't actually help themselves. There's an entire history here in the comics too this is why I think it's important to check out Ashley's thread, where Bruce Wayne has funded libraries, he's funded against wrongful convictions, he's even donated hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to underprivileged kids who can't afford actual educational, opportunities. Batman has an insane history of helping out those who can't help themselves monetarily, but it's not just in the comics. The comics is the mainline continuity, and it is the one that I think is most important to prove a point when we're talking about the history of a character. But I would argue that a lot of these adaptations of Batman have almost surpassed the comics in popularity now for a modern audience. And what I mean by that is you have more people going out to see a Batman movie than you do buying the newest Batman comic. You have more people going out to buy the newest Batman video game than to read the newest Batman comic. So I think it's also important for us to take a look at examples of this in the various adaptations of Batman throughout the mythos and throughout pop culture, because this is a big misconception about Bruce Wayne, that he's a selfish guy who is just obsessed with his war on crime and unwilling to help. I think that a good example of this also exists in the Arkham games, because I know that that is a big popular version of Batman that, especially on this channel, people really love. But if we look through the Arkham games, and I tried to place these in chronological order, actually in Batman Arkham Origins Cold Cold Heart, which is the DLC story expansion about Mr. Freeze, that actually begins with Bruce Wayne hosting a New Year's Eve party at his own expense, which will see the Wayne Foundation Humanitarian of the Year award given out. So while we don't have a ton of specifics on how the Wayne Foundation operates in the Arkham universe, it's safe to assume that it operates in a similar way as it does in the comics. The Wayne Foundation has actually been a staple of the Batman character mythos since its introduction all the way back in 1964. So we are talking basically a 60-year-old almost part of the Batman character back in Detective Comics issue 328. So this charitable organization has been a Bat family mainstay for this whole time. And also what's important to note about it is it's not just one thing. The Wayne Foundation in the comics is a parent organization to two other charitable organizations under it, the Martha Wayne Foundation and the Thomas Wayne Foundation, both founded in memoriam of Bruce's parents, but they also go to help people across Gotham City. There is also an example of this in Arkham Asylum, where Bruce Wayne actually runs another foundation on top of this, which is the Bruce Wayne Foundation for the Criminally Insane. So this is something that actually helps fund Arkham Asylum, and the point of it is to try and actually rehabilitate these people. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, what about Warden Sharp's horrible abuses of power and how deep his corruption went with Arkham Asylum in these games? Well, here's the thing. Yes, you're right about that, but Batman is not God. Despite what some comics would have you try and believe with, prep time examples, and despite the fact that some people will argue online that he could beat up everyone from Superman to Jesus himself. I mean, people really, they really stand on the hill that Batman could beat anyone. Despite that, it's important to note that Bruce Wayne is not an all-knowing God in this universe. He's just not. He actually finds out about Warden Sharp's corruption and all this stuff later on, which leads into the fact that he confronts him in Batman Arkham City about it, even saying a line like, enjoy your legacy, enjoy what you've done and what you've destroyed. It's worth mentioning that Bruce Wayne personally appeared to advocate against the creation of Arkham City because he believed that it was just an example of them throwing all of these people, some of them who are criminals who have nowhere else to go, some of them who are mentally incapable, and some of them who are actual super criminals who are very, very calculated and evil on purpose. He believed that it was just an example of throwing all of those together into essentially a giant war zone and letting them battle it out and destroy each other. He believed that that was wrong, and he personally appeared to advocate against that in the opening credits of Batman Arkham City, at which point he was subsequently captured by Hugo Strange, etc. You know the game. Finally, in Arkham Knight, it's worth mentioning that Wayne Enterprises actually pledged $300 million to redeveloping the area that had been turned into Arkham City by Hugo Strange, Ra's al Ghul, and others in Batman Arkham City. So even as far as Arkham Knight, Batman was still pledging hundreds of millions of dollars to help redevelop these areas and fix them up. He didn't have to do this. He could have just left it completely destroyed. It didn't matter. Monarch Theater was still up. If all he cared about was the place where his parents died, well, then he wouldn't do this, right? He would just redevelop the Monarch Theater and put some kind of preserve around it. No, he wanted to actually fix up Arkham City and help Gotham. This is all just in the Arkham games. But if we move on to other examples, even something like the Batman cartoon. In the comics for the Batman cartoon, Bruce Wayne actually offers the criminals working for Black Mask an opportunity to go to the Wayne Adult Education Center, where they're guaranteed a job at Wayne Enterprises if they are willing to walk away from Black Mask. He does this, by the way, before beating them up as Batman. He is actually there in person, ready to fight them, when he sort of unveils this plan from Bruce Wayne, which is, we know him, but they don't know, to offer these jobs and this education to these people who have nowhere else to go. And subsequently, they pretty much all leave the room because they decide that's probably better than getting their bones broken by Batman. And it's actually a lasting career opportunity because Black Mask doesn't actually care about them. He cares about them as much as he can use them. So I think that that's an interesting example too, but it doesn't end there. You know, it's not just the comics, it's not just Arkham, it's not just the Batman cartoon, which by the way is underrated and is now out on Blu-ray. You should watch it. It's really, really freaking good. But it even goes to something like the DC animated universe. We already talked about the Tompkins, the whole Leslie Tompkins thing with the Thomas Wayne Memorial Clinic. Batman funds it for free and basically gives away money to help the disenfranchised be able to afford medical care. But in Batman The New Adventures, we also get to see that Batman and Dick Grayson earlier on during the events of the animated series, the, normal earlier seasons one, they encounter one of Joker's thugs named Connor. Batman actually cornered him in front of his family and interrogated him about his crimes, and this really pissed off Dick Grayson because Dick Grayson believed that they should have done this away from Connor's family. This was one of the things that kind of drove a bit of a wedge between Batman and, who would become Nightwing, but Robin, which actually kind of led to their separation, was just a methodology difference of brutality and scariness, where Robin was more concerned about the helping of people and trying to be empathetic. Batman was very much, in there fighting crime, getting his hands dirty, that kind of thing. And this sort of led to a split between them. And it also, at the beginning of the episode, sets up this idea of, well, maybe people are right. Maybe Batman is too angry. Maybe he's too hands-on. Maybe he should step back and just give that money away. But it's interesting because years later, during the New Adventures, Dick Grayson and Tim Drake, who's the new Robin at that time, retrieved Connor's wallet after it was stolen, which then reveals that Connor was given an opportunity by Bruce Wayne to turn his life around. He now works at Wayne Enterprises as a night watchman, and Bruce consistently checks in with him to see how he and his family are doing. So despite this facade, this, outer shell of Batman, Bruce Wayne is still there, and he's still giving, and he's still helping. Another example I even just thought of while talking about this from the DCAU is the fact that Batman funds the Watchtower. This is, a $1 billion satellite up in the atmosphere, and he actually does this twice to help fund the Justice League, and he does this at a loss. He does this just because the Justice League is good to help against things like natural disaster, interplanetary invasions, which we saw was needed, and all kinds of other threats from the stars and Earth itself. Batman is there funding the League on his own in the DCAU to help keep it around and keep it running. There's also so many more examples that we could run through today, but I have a couple just to kind of slam my point home. Even some examples from things that people might think are unconventional Batman adaptations. Something like Batman 1989 with Michael Keaton. I know this is a very unorthodox adaptation of Batman. It is one that I love, but it is very, very different from the comics. And there's a really good line here between Alexander Knox and Vicky Vale where they talk about all of the things that Bruce Wayne does, saying he gives to all these humanitarian causes, but then he collects all this stuff. He probably does it to get chicks. They like him for his big charity balls, is what Alexander Knox said. And then Vicky Vale and him go back and forth, joking about him having a bankroll and all this other stuff. But what's interesting about it is that they straight up say, even this version of Batman, he gives away to humanitarian causes a ton of his money and hosts charity balls himself. If we want to go even more unorthodox, Frank Miller's Batman. This is one of the most unorthodox adaptations you can find because it's very much in the heart of the original comics with something like Year One, and I would argue The Dark Knight Returns. But once it starts to get into some of the more outlandish stuff like All-Star or Strikes Again, or even in some ways, I would say Master Race, although I think that's much more in heart with the comics again. This is a very unorthodox adaptation of Batman, the Miller one. It's one of my favorite, but it's very odd. And he's known for being very, very brutal. But even with him, one of the most brutal adaptations of the character, he personally funded Harvey Dent's reform and treatments to fix his Two-Face persona for years in this comic. That's actually revealed during the beginning of The Dark Knight Returns, that Batman has been there even after he quit being Batman and he's just been Bruce Wayne. He is still giving away his money to humanitarian causes to fix people that he sees as victims and that he believes can be better people. He even goes on to say that we need to believe that Harvey Dent can change and that people can beat their personal demons. Finally, the last example I have is from the Nolan verse. Now, Nolan is another one, and the reason I use this example with the Nolan Batman from The Dark Knight and Batman Begins and Rises is because I think this is one of the most popular versions of Batman that people know of, but it's also not entirely in line with the comics in every way. You know, like Nolan was trying to make a more realistic, grounded universe, and because of that this adaptation, while it is extremely popular, is a bit different from other adaptations of the character, but it maintains that soul of who Batman is. And it does that very well because in The Dark Knight Rises, we actually get to see that Bruce Wayne funds, and I always say the name of this wrong, St. Swithin's orphanage, where Detective Blake grows up. We know this because Blake comes and confronts a retired Bruce Wayne. He even tells him, "Hey, I know you're Batman." And Bruce is kind of like, no, I'm not. Go away. and we basically find out that he actually funded this orphanage where Blake grew up, and he actually gave all these kids hope and all this other stuff. And this is the kind of stuff he doesn't need to do, okay? I mean, we see in something like, you know, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, this more playboy-ish image of this Bruce Wayne, where he's kind of like, oh, well, who cares? Batman's a psycho. Yeah, Harvey Dent, he seems cool, but who knows? And he's kind of, you know, just projecting this image of himself out there to, I would say, make himself looking conspicuous. But deep down in the heart of this character, he's still giving. He's still giving away. And the reason for this, I believe, is because Batman, yes, he does have all these backup plans to, fight the League if they get out of hand, or all these other people. He does have all of these contingencies, and he does have a very, very pessimistic city, right? Gotham itself is very, very cynical. The city itself, it's very turned on itself and very on edge, but he himself isn't that. Batman is a character who does give hope to people. And this is something that I think is interesting because I think a lot of people have lost sight of this. They see Batman as a tool of fear only. This is something that was actually very well addressed in the new movie The Batman with Robert Pattinson by Matt Reeves, where they actually address the fact that yes, Batman is a tool of fear to be used against criminals, but also he's someone that a normal person can look at and doesn't need to be scared of, who can give them hope, who reminds them that there's somebody out there fighting for them. And in the same way, Bruce Wayne is that same thing for just the average everyday person in Gotham City. All of these examples aren't including the multiple orphaned or disenfranchised young people Batman took in over the course of all of his adaptations, from Dick Grayson to Jason Todd to Carrie Kelly, etc. We are blowing past all kinds of stuff, even the fact that Wayne Enterprises themselves basically helps run and fund the healthcare system in Gotham, even outside of the free clinic. They help keep that system going. Bruce Wayne at every turn is there to step in and help Gotham City. And I think it's really a big disingenuous argument to say that he's not, or to not validate all of these examples and just focus on the Batman part. Bruce Wayne is not just Batman. Batman is not just Bruce Wayne. This is a very intricate and complicated character who is more than the sum of his parts, and who does a lot more than people are willing to look at and see to help people. I think in some ways the billionaire playboy persona idea has actually bleeded over into real life, where people who don't know much about this character or who have watched one movie or played one game want to have a galaxy brain take and be like, I'm gonna, shit on like 80 years of mythology here and take it down in one swipe. But I think it's built up in a way where you can't really do that if you're being honest and looking at these examples with an open mind and actually taking them into consideration. That's why I want to talk about this today. I know it's all fiction. I know it's not real. He's not a real person. But, just like many real people in the real world who do help, Batman is a symbol of hope, both in fiction and in real life. This is a character who is supposed to remind us that we can be better, we can be more than ourselves, and that we can help in many different ways. And I think it's sad to me that people are willing to just look past that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts in the comments down below about this Batman take and about these examples. I'm always curious to hear if you have more examples or if you have any criticisms of what I said or whatever. I'm interested to hear that. And why does this character mean so much to you? Because I know it means a lot to a lot of people, and I'm interested to hear that. Please be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content, check out Ashley's thread. She does a very, very good job of racking up even more examples from the mainline comics continuities than I was able to. So that's really worth a read for you if you, ever see someone who believes this. If you want to either point them to this video or point them to Ashley's thread, I think that would be good. Please have a great day. And as always, everyone, stay shway.